in the 70s. It was almost like a kind of because of the failure of the Vietnam War and then Nixon going down. There was a period of it was like a glasnost, almost where everything was kind of opened up for a while and then everything closed up again after a few years. And the Democrats were a much more active for a time opposition. And before that, in the Cold War, they were a lot more, I don't know, muscular, I guess you would say. And how much, so, we talked about the Reagan administration's very concerted and complex and effective efforts to rein in the media and beat them down into submission. How much of that was applied to the Democrat Party? I mean, nowadays, I don't think anybody really expects the Democrat Party to stand up for anything anymore. I mean, except maybe to get a few better benefits on the margins. But I think people had much higher expectations of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party in the 70s, at least, through the early 80s, and that just was gone by the end of the Reagan years. Did they do the same thing to a lot of sort of more vocal opposition Democrats?
Yes, I think if you look at what those documents show from the so-called public diplomacy or perception management operations, they weren't just aimed at the journalists or more broadly at the public. They were aimed at troublesome members of Congress. They would figure out what themes. They would talk in these terms of, well, what theme might be good for a certain district. If, say, it's a heavily Catholic district, they'd work on some Catholic theme. Or if it's a lot of Jewish voters, they'd work on some, the Sandinistas are anti-Semitic. And they would work on various themes that would then put the congressmen or senators in a difficult spot. And you'd start seeing being faced with that kind of allegation that would be sort of ginned up in many cases against like a target like the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. That the congressmen would be under such pressure that they'd have to start backing away. Mm-hmm. Someone like Mike Barnes, for instance, who was in a suburban district in Maryland, when the Reagan people concocted the anti-Semitic theme, which the U.S. Embassy in Nicaragua itself had disavowed, said it's not true. They said that the Sandinistas were not anti-Semitic, that they had there were prominent Jewish people in the government, and the Jews who had fled were people who were close to Somoza. So it wasn't that they were being persecuted because they were Jewish; it was just because of their associations with Somoza. But so even when the embassy was saying it wasn't true, it was still put out as the theme, mm-hmm. because it was a very effective theme. Because if you call someone anti-Semitic, that's a mm-hmm. very serious charge, and it should be. So anyway, so they did that. They put out that theme. And Mike Barnes decided he had to, for his career, denounce the Sandinistas for being anti-Semitic. Because otherwise, what are you being? You being a Sandinista sympathizer? Right. So you saw that sort of baiting went on for members of Congress, too. And they were weakened. And plus, you have to remember that in the 1980 election, it wasn't just that Reagan beat Carter. It was that after Carter had failed to get the hostages out, and basically his presidency had sort of crumbled over that failure. Some of the best Democrats, or at least the most aggressive Democrats, let's say, were also driven out of Congress. They also lost their elections. So by the time you get to the early 80s, the McGoverns, the Churches, the Bayes, all these folks are gone. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people who had made a name for themselves trying to rein in parts of the U.S. government and the CIA side, or with the military-industrial complex side, or the Vietnam War side, had been essentially knocked out of the box. They weren't here anymore. Mm-hmm. So you had, and a lot of those folks also, a number of them also go back to the days of the New Deal. Mm-hmm. They came out of the Great Depression. They understood how politics could actually play a much more direct role in the lives of people. The crowd you start getting in the 1980s is a very different group of Democrats. They're much more oriented toward money. They need money to sort of run campaigns. They stop being people who are sort of strong labor people, because labor unions have gotten weaker by this point. Reagan does a lot to break down the unions in the 80s. Mm. So for a lot of reasons, the Democrats sort of have to reinvent themselves. And they kind of reinvent themselves as Bill Clinton, in a way. This idea of taking pro-corporate positions, being a little bit more reasonable maybe than some of the Republicans, not quite as aggressive in going after certain things, but they were for deregulations. So there was a lot of similarity between Republican policies and Democratic policies as we move into toward the present. And a lot of that breaking down occurs right around that point of the late 70s, early 80s, when where a lot of things shift, and a lot of our impressions are still locked into the 70s, because we think of the Democrats and Republicans kind of going at it over Watergate, or that we think of the Washington Post and the New York Times, going against the government and exposing wrongdoing. That hasn't happened for a long, long time.
So again, that was Robert Parry, and the last name, I should remind readers again, it's Parry. And the site is Consortium News, consortiumnews.com. And you'll find a whole huge body of work going back, as he said, 20 years. And he really has the goods on all these stories and a lot of lost history, which was like we live with the consequences of it, even though we don't know where the hell it comes from. It seems like everything's starting back with Nixon's, treasonous deal in South Vietnam up through today.